Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I accept the protocol as was presented to me from the committee. I'm very honored to be back in the Edmonton Public Library. I was here once before, not that long ago, here, and so I'm happy to be back. I always imagined that the Edmonton Public Library would have this huge stage and performance theater, and I'm told that the new renovations downtown are going to be promising of a very beautiful new library setting. So I'm looking forward to that. I thank all the sponsors for making these speaker series available to the general public. I think that it's very brave and shows commitment from the heart for the committee to keep this spirit moving into the new generations. I came from, I'm the eldest of 12 children. My mother raised all of us and many others. And we're very fortunate in our family that we were able to be blessed with very powerful grandmothers, grandfathers, and that we always have had 5 generations of women alive. My mother is 88 years old, and she's the head of our house. And there's me and my daughter, my granddaughter, and her daughters. So we do always have 5 generations. And I think the beauty of having that kind of extended family, as you would call it probably in English, in our culture, it's normal. It's not, we don't separate families from one generation to the other. We don't talk about them as if they're not part of us. We are one circle. We are one big, happy family. I'm from the Musqueam Cree Nation, which is an hour's drive south. Many of you maybe never have had the opportunity to stop there, but I come from a very vibrant community of 20,000 peoples that live in a very large and vast territory within Treaty 6. My grandmother, my mother's mother, is a descendant of World War I veteran Henry Louis Norwest. And she, as a result of her mother's passing when she was only a baby, she was taken by the Ermineskin Residential School and was raised by the nuns, the Sisters of Assumption and the Oblates of Mary Immaculate in the Ermineskin Residential School. She then married my grandfather, Joe Dion Buffalo, and had these big, beautiful family of my mother and her siblings, 6 siblings. And I remember, you know, my great-grandmother, who is my mother's grandmother, and her name was Mary Nepos Buffalo. Again, 5 generations of women alive. I remember being a very small child and having my great-grandmother as my early childhood educator. And so I was very lucky that I got all of that training when I was very small. Before I was age 7, I went to residential school as a day scholar. And I always share that because I think that no one else can take credit for my leadership ability, because I still reap the benefits of that education that I received as an early childhood educator. As an advocate in my life as a policy technician, I advocated for the creation of Head Start, which is now a national program for children ages 4 and 5, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten in Canada. And I started that training, that that process, not by design, but by accident. So being the eldest child and being the only girl, there was me, and then I had these 8 brothers. Can you imagine? Imagine this little house on a prairie, and my mother being the head of the house, and a very bossy Buffalo woman. All Buffalo women are bossy. Don't ever let anyone tell you anything different. So, and it's because of that strength of women and our ancestors that we survived. By the love of God and the strength of our grandmothers, we are here today. And I want to share some of those teachings with you. When I say that no one else can take the credit for our education, I really mean that in every sense of the word. Because by the time I was 7, I had already learned all my training that I thought was necessary, and I could also read and write. So when I went to school at grade 1, I wasn't your normal child. I was a little defiant, and I was asking questions all the time. And that's not what my grandmother told me. That's not what my great-grandmother told me. My grandfather said this, and he said that. And no, that's not the way you treat people. That's not nice. So, you know, by the time you're 7 years old and on the reserve, you're raised pretty tough and you're pretty fit. And you have a very good, strong sense of judgment. And being the eldest child in a very large family, you have a lot of responsibility. And you learn to hone those skills very early. And you also have the ability to drop kick people if you needed to. So as a child growing up on the reserve, it wasn't a very, you know, I mean, you had to be warrior-like. Otherwise, you became very victimized very early. And you learn how to behave like a victim. And it wasn't very good. It wasn't healthy at all. So I didn't go to school in the boarding school system till I was in grade 7. So those 7 years that I had in training was with my great-grandmother. So I went to home. Of course, we had to walk quite a ways to go to the bus stop. Every morning you would walk a mile and then maybe a mile, you know, it was horrible, the educational system that we had even as day scholars. And you had the ability to debrief each day. And the way my mother raised us, and my grandmothers, is that everybody had chores. Get up off the bus, you put on your raggedy old work clothes, and you hauled water, you chopped wood, you did laundry, and you had young siblings of all ages to look after. You did the cooking and the cleaning and etc. There was no end to it. So by the time you were in bed, you were exhausted. But one of the things that I remember the most is that we never went without breakfast. And if you go to my mother's house even today, there's always bacon and eggs that wake you up in the morning. And so with that, we were never allowed to miss school in our home. And even today, you go to my mother's house, you'll never see anybody sleeping in. Everybody's out the door by 7 in the morning. And so we were raised with that ethic, strong work ethic, and no one was allowed to be lazy. And it didn't matter if you went dancing up all night, you know, you still had to get up in the morning and do chores. You know what I'm talking about, right? So with that kind of you know, ethic and upbringing, by the time you were teenage years, you know, I was in grade 7, I got to be I got targeted a lot by the administration because, again, I was a public speaker already. And not only was I a public speaker, but I would win every public speaking competition within Alberta region. So I would go on tours a lot, and grade 7, grade 8, grade 9. Grade 9, I was able to debate and master some of the high school. I challenged them and I beat them hands down. So when you have that training as a public speaker from your parents who encourage you to speak, and might I also say that I was encouraged to speak by my great-grandmother, who did not speak a word of English. So you learn to translate transactions, banking, horse trading, gardening, Indian agent, the health nurse, the public servants that came to the reserve, the police. And so I would have to understand what my great-grandmother was saying, and then I would translate back. And I'm just a little kid. And the priest would come. And the nicest thing of all, and this is, I want to share this, is very valuable, I think, for a lot of young people. My great-grandmother was a widow. Her husband died in 1952. I was 2 years old. And he was born in 1875. So remember, that's a year before treaty, 1876, Treaty 6. And so her knowledge base was so sophisticated and deep in the knowledge of treaty, the signing, the spatial relationship we had as sovereign nation. We were, independent and so on. But she also told me the stories about how smallpox, tuberculosis, and all of these deadly diseases that had been recently introduced and we did not have the immune systems in our nations to be able to combat and survive. And I remember my great-grandmother telling me stories that my grandfather, her husband, my great-grandfather, would leave sometimes for a week, 2 weeks at a time, and that he would go burying people and assist many times with the priest, and that he was a medicine man and very well respected, that he would travel, and from morning till night, that's all they did was give people the proper burial rites. And not just Indian people, not our own, with the settlers as well. And that's how well respected that he was. My great-grandmother was a midwife. She was a medicine woman. She was a caregiver, maternal health expert, and she gathered medicines. All her medicines she got from Mother Earth and all her roots. And I want to share that I was told, even from as a small child, that my great-grandfather had the keys to the church. In other words, he had an understanding of the relationship, the sacred relationship that he had with the priests that came into our territory, and that he was the one that took care of most of the ceremonials and weddings and all of that. So when my grandfather died, he was very young. It was an unexpected death, and it was devastating for my family. And so, he had pneumonia, and he just went to the hospital and never came back. So my family suffered as a result. And a lot of the ceremony, his songs are still sung today in the powwow circuit, in the powwow societies. You still hear his name said, even though he's been gone for over 65 years. And I think that's awesome. I think that's a wonderful legacy to have. I think also that my great-grandfather, because of his special relationship, left my great-grandmother with a lot of prestige and honor and dignity and respect. Because my great-grandmother, being the matriarch now of the head of the family, had never been to school. And all of her traditional knowledge was passed down to her by great-grandparents who had never been to school either. So, you know, that's hundreds of years of traditional knowledge being handed down. And I think that one of the things that she must have prayed very hard for me and my survival. That's all I can say. Because of the trials and tribulations and other things that we have had to endure as mothers and my mother, it is unbelievable. And one of the things, the earliest memories I have as a small child was going to school, going to church, going over about 3-4 miles on the country trail with a little, you know, 2-horse buggy. And I mean, as a kid, I was just absolutely fearless. I wasn't afraid of horses, and I wasn't afraid of dogs. I wasn't afraid of anything, really. And because you are, you know, of kindred spirit, you didn't have, you know, you lived in a very secure, loving, cultural, safe environment. You didn't have any of the fears that you would have normally as other children did. And I think, to me, that's what saved me. That's what kept me safe, and even after going into the residential school system. And I remember coming across the prairie with my grandmother after church. We would stop and we would visit. But there's this one clearing in the prairie where we would stop, my grandmother, we put all our roots and our berries and whatever we picked that morning out on this beautiful canvas or white cloth and drying the berries. And I remember going over making sure I'd be in my bare feet and making sure that I said they were raisins. Cookum, we're making our own raisins because we were drying these Saskatoon berries. And in order for them to keep for the winter, we had to make sure that they were air dried, like raisins. And so I called them my raisins, and she would laugh and she'd say, "You're so crazy." And you know, you try and also always translate information into a modern day context, even as a child. So what brought me to that? Grade 9, age 7, I remember hiding behind my great-grandmother's house. Just a little one-room house, no bigger than this, and it just had a wood stove in the middle and a heater and a bed, and a very small bed by the window, by the doorway, and our little table over here. And I remember the priest coming, and I recognized that was like, I think back then on the reserve, the only people that had vehicles was the field nurse, who was this gruff old lady. She was like an army nurse, right? And the RCMP and the Indian agent and a priest. So heaven help you if any of these people showed up in your house. Something was up. So I had to go make sure everything was cool. So, and then I overheard the priest saying, "She's getting too old now, she can't stay home." And my grandmother said, "No, she's not going." But I had to go. I was 7 now, I'm too old. Can't fool anybody anymore, right? Can't stay home. And what they do is they threaten with the RCMP if you don't go. They will cut off your family allowance to your parents and all funding. So I didn't want to jeopardize my parents and my mother and so on. But when we went into the boarding school system, it was like a whole, imagine if somebody came and took your children. Imagine, and said, "You're going to learn German language. You're going to live like a German. You're going to adopt our values. You're not going to be able to pray to God in the way that you've been taught in your own language." No, And you will, from morning till night, will follow my rules. And if you dare misbehave or caught speaking your language, you will be punished severely. And then whoever the perverts or the pedophile, and let's be honest, it existed. And that dark side that entered the midst of our peoples devastated our men and our women. It was really the most ugly, most painful thing that anyone could ever experience. And what is more is that there was nobody that you could go to file a complaint. There was no laws that would protect the children in this country. And there certainly was not any laws to protect the Indigenous children in this country, even less now. And I say this because I decided when I was in my passport off the reserve was that I would be examined as a grade 9 student by an external, and I was convinced that, okay, what they would do is they just give you a number, and then this person, whoever is a non-Indigenous person, would come from Edmonton and work for the Alberta government, and they would test you. So my saving grace, what saved me, was that I left the residential school system to go to high school off the reserve because I graduated with honors. And there was none of those teachers, and you know I'm such a terrible little girl. I remember writing that exam, grade 9 exam, and an hour. The mathematics was just a 2-hour exam in 1 hour. And my teacher said, hey, come back here. And I looked back and I said, excuse me, are you talking to me? Marilyn, come back here. I said, no, I'm not going back there. I'm done. I'm done with you. Do you understand? Don't ever talk to me in that tone of voice ever again. I'm never coming back here. And I mean it. Don't disrespect me. I whipped out a cigarette and I smoked the smoke right there in front of him. Go ahead, expel me. Go ahead. Tell my parents, go ahead. I'm out of here. And I left. And I remember walking home. I remember crying every day and praying to God that I would be off that community and leave. So when I got my, every day I used to ride a horse to go to the post office. And I remember someone saying, if you get a white envelope, it means you've passed, or something. Or a brown envelope, it means you passed. And it'd come with a certificate. If you got the white envelope, it means you flunked. You're not going to make it off the reserve. So being the eldest child, my mother said, you'll be fine. One way or the other, we're going to get you to a school. So I left in grade 10 to go to Drumheller Composite High. And can I tell you, the most cultural shock experience of my life. Holy smokes, these white people are so dysfunctional. I cannot believe this. They actually have affairs with each other. They have illegitimate children. And they speak with these funny accents, and they come from Scotland, England, and everywhere else in between. And the most amazing thing of all is that all of them, the people that I knew, were very well educated people. So I bonded with this family from England, and they came from Liverpool. So can you imagine, here I am, a teenager in the early 60s, and hearing about the Beatles and the Dave Clark 5 and all these Rolling Stones, and I thought I was in heaven. I thought I died and gone to heaven. I'm going to Liverpool. And I'm the caregiver of these 4 lovely little girls who were a little cheeky, but so was I, and I could handle them. And so they taught me about Yorkshire pudding, steak and kidney pie, and they drank sherry every night before dinner. I thought, that's pretty civilized. But I don't know if I like the sherry. But this gentleman, who was my teacher, was the guidance counselor for Drumheller School District, who became my best friend. So he asked me one day, and he said, Marilyn, what are you interested in? I said, you know what? I don't even know, honest to God. But don't put me into that. No, I'm not going to go into beauty culture. I don't want to be a secretary. And I said, I can't type. I don't know how to type. I'm not interested in being a secretary. Well, what do you want to do? I said, put me over there where those boys are. I said, those guys over there, they study drafting, architectural and mechanical drawing. Are you serious? So beside my academic courses, I took these drafting 10, 20, and 30. I was the only girl, and I loved it. So my dream was to become an engineer, was to become an architect, except one thing is my first summer job off that, when I graduated from high school, is I realized there was no money to build housing. There was no money for engineering, for post-secondary, nothing. There was absolutely $0 for any of this. So I decided very early that that was not for me, even though I had worked there 2 summers. And I met Douglas Cardinal, who was Canada's sweetheart, darling architect, who became one of my good friends. So I went to work for the Indian Association of Alberta as a political assistant to Harold Cardinal, the president of the Indian Association of Alberta, and I was in heaven. Because there I got to continue my work that I had trained and learned from my great-grandmother. I could read policy. I learned how to translate policy from English to Cree, not in northern dialect, Cree, northern Alberta, back to English. So I rapidly developed my own shorthand, and listening to the elders speaking as they deliberate over very senior, high-level policy discussions about treaties and about land rights, environmental issues, and Treaty Number 8 up north. So there went my dream. I could have been an engineer, I could have been a doctor, anything I wanted. But I did not think that anything I was going to learn at University of Alberta was going to be relevant to what I wanted to do in life. And I mean that. Not to show any disrespect, but because I had taken courses at Mount Royal University. And that was dumb. Like, why would anybody want to waste 4 years in this stuff? This is crazy. It's so irrelevant. And even if you study it, they don't care if you've mastered it even after when you're finished. Why? It's so irrelevant. So my grandfather, John Titusis, told my dad, leave her alone. She's doing fine. She's got a good job. Leave her alone. So in order to get away from my dad and my mother, I moved to northern Alberta in 1969. I was 19 years old. And there I learned that there were no reserves up north, and that there were all of this beauty, pristine lands and territory in Fort Chipewyan, where I went to work. And the elders there taught. I would advance for my political boss a month at a time, so that I would do, again, the same work. I would use the teachings of my grandmother. I would hold coffee table or tea discussions with the people, going door to door. I was 19, and they would talk to me about environmental issues and in preparation, the ministers are going to be coming, and we're talking about Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau has introduced new policies, and his minister, Jean Chrétien, is not very friendly to our people. And this is what they plan on doing. They're going to abolish the Indian reservations, and they're going to make us all the same as anybody else. And that was to the elders, words of war, not acceptable. So my job was to go and do these door-to-door information sessions, and made sure that, you know, all people got the same information as everybody else. And so I learned at that early age that, you know, when the ministers come, you have to prepare. And so the elders would talk to us, and the chiefs that became my lifetime friends would tell us, in the future, when you're, you know, this is in Fort Chipewyan, when, you know, at the time, the members of Fort Chipewyan were being taught to move. They had to relocate to Fort McMurray and give up their homelands to come and live in Fort McMurray. And they were given all these fridge and stove and everything of modern convenience. And here were these hunting and trapper people that had been used to making $200,000 a year as hunters and trappers, now all of a sudden being forced to change their lifestyle and their work. And there were problems. So I became good friends with many of them, and the elders told us, in the future, you will see the time when from here to south to Fort McMurray will be nothing but white snow. And I thought, what are you talking about, white snow? He said, it's going to be a desert. No, can't be. How could that be? It can't be. No, I refuse to accept that. Today, when you fly from Fort Chipewyan to Fort McMurray, it's white desert. It's nothing but sand. It's dead land. There's no more trees. And the animals are sick. They said, the animals are going to leave us. They're going to go further and further north. And I thought, this is the Wood Buffalo National Park. How could the animals leave us? And here that year was the first year I had seen how the lake, the shoreline, went about 20, 30 miles away from the natural. 15, and it went 20 miles. And there were no more fish. There were no more muskrats. There was no more, nothing. Everything died. And what happened was, because of the Bennett Dam in northern British Columbia, many of you are young, you don't remember that. But if you Google the Bennett Dam of British Columbia, you will see how that water system was disturbed, and that the water, you know, was redirected, and the energy of the natural paths of the water systems failed our people. So in that era was the first time I had taken a complete total interest at the ecosystems and trap lines. Because remember, I came from a reserve where it was all parceled off into small little checkerboard squares like a quilt patch on the prairie by white farmers. Yes, my people farmed too, but there was no wildlife. There was not thousands of buffalo roaming the prairie anymore, or moose. You know, it was like it is today. And so when I first went there, I thought, holy smokes, how do these people govern themselves? Well, they have a hereditary governance system. But they also have an imposition of Indian Act, federal government. Same Indian agent used to come along and, okay, yeah. I'm 19 years old. And defiant as heck. And the young Harold Cardinal was only 25 years old, my boss. And our elders were so engaging and supportive, kind, loving, and would challenge us. And I would be the first one up in the morning to make sure we were taking notes and our resolutions were prepared and they were drafted properly and checked and everything else. And that, to me, was the best education that anybody could ever ask for. Today, I feel sorry for young people that don't speak their language. I take pity on them. But it's not their fault. It's not their fault. It's just that we, as parents and our ancestors, have had the most difficult time of just surviving. We've just been in the business of just pure survival. And the very fact that we even survived to be able to stand here and talk before you today is a miracle. An absolute miracle. And I defy anybody today to be able to come into my communities and spend a week, maybe even a month, or heaven help those teachers that come and spend a year or maybe two, and some of them, they fall in love with our people and they stay. But many people can't stand the stresses. Many of our people, they get sick because of the stresses and the stress-related diseases that come along with a very high diabetes rate, extremely high suicide. Our people, depression, despair in our communities, and there's no money. And, you know, as an Indigenous woman, you also face a lot of discrimination. Yes, even by our own people. Because of the way the government systems are so paternalistic, the Indian Act is the worst piece of legislation. And if you go to Africa, if you go to Australia, New Zealand, anywhere there's Indigenous peoples that live today, the Indian Act is there. Believe it. It doesn't matter where I've gone in this world, it's there in South America, Central America. Our people are oppressed. And it's the same regime that superimposed their legislations over us. Now, let's go back now. I became a single mother of 6 children. I've been a single mother for 35 years. Because my husband had been damaged through the residential school system. Terrific athlete, wonderful, intelligent man, engineer, geologist. But he suffered greatly in that system. He's alive, but he's not healthy. He's not well. So as mothers, again, we have to pick up and we leave. We have to do what we can to make sure that our children are safe. And within that time, I can honestly say, I can look back. I've never been on social assistance in my life because we have to make do with what we have. And because I became a single mother and, you know, defiant researcher, I went and researched in places that nobody even dare go. And many of these institutions within the Alberta government were not very supportive of that kind of research. And I started doing child welfare research when I was very young. I was 20 years old when I started doing parent finding and reuniting families. Children had been adopted and had lost their nationhood, had lost their Indian status. And many, many women that had been married off, also their children got taken. And they were no longer accepted back in their nationhood, in their own nations. because of the Indian Act legislation again. And when you analyze the policy, it's very simple. Here you have the superimposition by white policy, the Indian Act regime, which is very well government funded. If it wasn't for us Indians, none of those Indian agents would have a job. Okay? I mean, simple. They're there because we are alive. And believe you me, they make big bucks. And I'm not scared. I'm not scared. You know, the minister, Marilyn, if she was standing right here, I'd be saying the same things. Not scared of her. Because she's no different from me. She ain't no superior to me. In fact, she works for me. Okay? Let's get that straight. That's paternalistic. It's all of the laws and legislations, recognition given to the man, patri systems. Our systems, our laws, our traditional laws is very simple. Our matri. In other words, you get all your teachings and your support and all of your language, your training, everything through the matri. So when you're following the kinship of your ancestors, you naturally follow the mother's side, the grandmother's side, etc., etc. And all the children become the clans of the grandmothers, not the patri. And I know some people may get offended, but if you do your research, you will find that that's the case. And that's why the child welfare system does not work. Because again, it's imposed. And again, it's done without proper consultation. And it's not respective of the cultural appropriate systems that are in existence today. And God help any social workers that's going to come and try and take my grandkids today, because I'll tap dance on their forehead, believe you me. And I cannot believe that, and I will say this, I cannot believe at this day, 2017, just when you think you're going to have a big, beautiful breakfast, and I'm an early riser, I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I read the newspaper, and I read an Indigenous woman has been jailed and shackled as a rape victim in this province, in this city. And everybody's just like, oh, all right. I had to double check 2 or 3, make sure that I had it right, that it was June 2017, that it wasn't 2007, or what, you know what I mean? That's how shocked I became. You think, okay, I'm over this now. It's 24 hours have gone by. I've talked to all the right parties, and I'm not feeling well today, but, you know, this is really serious stuff. As former president of Native Women Association of Canada, God help Trudeau. Young man, selfies, handsome, beautiful hair. If I was president, there'd be no way the airwaves would be just vibrating. That's how angry I became. I've never been so angry in a long time. As when I heard that a child that had been in the welfare system in the province of Alberta, the biological parents, the mother, and the chiefs had to hire a lawyer for the remains of that child to be buried in her own territory, to be given proper Cree territorial burial rights in recognition of her spirituality. Again, I had to look, is this for real? Is this 2017? Wow, what has happened to us? What about the Truth and Reconciliation? If you read the calls to action, 94, the very first part of it is the amendments that are necessary for us to bring peace to the child, and a remake of the child welfare system in this province. in dealing with the homelessness and the urban poor. I spent 15 years in Ottawa. First, I got so fed up, I thought, I gotta confirm my suspicions. I can't believe that these white people be so ignorant as to pass these laws. Unbelievable. So Mulroney got the boot. I moved to Ottawa, and my 5 kids with me. And I became the National Director of Indigenous Policy for the Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien. So I came against a culture shock from the reserve in the town site, head of the hockey mothers, school board and all this, straight to Ottawa. And I thought, I need to have my head examined. Why am I doing this? I need to do this. So I stayed there, and then I went to work as 4 years with, as a senior policy advisor to Ovid Mercredi, the national chief, for almost 4 years. Then I became president of Native Women Association of Canada for 3. And for 5 years, I worked on Indigenous litigations and laws to the Supreme Court, and working with the Gitxsan in the Delgamuukw court case, which is where the national or the hereditary chiefs of the Gitxsan Nation challenged the Canadian government on a title case, Aboriginal title. And also the Corbier case, the Batchewana case, off reserve, giving grants and rights recognition to our people that live in urban centers, that those laws do not just apply on the reservations but also elsewhere. And so the last litigation I was involved in, and working with a team of about 26 lawyers with the Victor Buffalo versus the Queen, which is a treaty rights case. And also we did the accounting and how much money and oil they took away from us and our people and our lands. But within that process, I also was working in support of the International Forum and chaired the Indigenous Women of the Americas, also chaired the Indigenous Forum at the United Nations, Indigenous Women's Forum at the United Nations. And I learned a lot. I learned that our experience here in Canada is the same as our sisters from other countries, from other continents. And that our experience here is the one thing, the one gift that we have to give our children, our young people, is the gift of hope. Yes, it's okay to be organized and have your little round dancing and creating awareness, but it's one thing to be analytical, but it's also very important that you do not become cynical in that process. Because once you become a cynical person, you're of no use to anybody. You're not good, no good. You can't instill hope. In instilling hope, you have given a child hope to be able to pursue their career goals and moving forward and gaining skills, marketable skills, professional degrees that will make sure that they will be able to provide for their children in the futures. When I came home from Ottawa in January 2007, the very first thing I did was study and analyze. Remember, I had never been to university, but I'd lectured at every university in this country. And I'd been on academic staff on 2 universities. But when I came home, I could not believe Alberta. Alberta should be ashamed of themselves and their outdated, archaic educational policies, social policies Like, go hide your head in the sand. Nobody deserves to look at your face. That's how disgusted I was. I honestly, after 15 years living in Ontario, I just couldn't believe it. 6 months, that's all I did was research on every aspect of reviewing the K-12 system in this province. So in that, I decided, okay, I'm going to start with my community. I designed a process using my political, analytical skills and asking our people on how they want their children to be educated. So I gathered 52 elders, and again, using the same skills I learned from my great-grandma. They talked to me in Cree. This is what we want. I have all of that documented. They sat down with me for 2 days, and everything has been recorded. So I met with the teachers and the staff. I met with the young people and the parents and chief and council. Within a month, I had all of those consultations, and most of it was in Cree, but I transcribed it to English, policy language. From that, I designed a provincial-wide K-12 review and into what is now the MOU for First Nations education in Alberta. It's very detailed, and it was endorsed by 5 parties. The 48 Chiefs of Alberta, Treaties 6, 7, and 8, the Alberta government, and the federal government. And all of those ministers signed off. And it's up to them now, the Alberta government and the federal government, to step aside and engage our young people, our educators, to be able to design the curriculum. Because the poor guys don't know any better. They think they can do it without us. Well, guess what? They're wasting money. They're wasting time. They haven't bothered to consult the parents. They haven't. The K-12, if you think the problems on the reserve are bad, on the educational system, you should learn to see what's going on in the provincial system off reserve. It will curl your hair. And it gives us a very bad name, but you know what? All of that work that would happen without our input for many generations. The Truth and Reconciliation calls to action were released 2 years ago, and I was there. And where 10,000 Canadians, non-Indigenous peoples from all faiths and background marched in Ottawa. It was the most beautiful sight to behold. And I was very happy to be witness to that event. And where Canadians came forward and said, we stand with you, we support you, we understand, and we will make a better Canada tomorrow. And that gives me a lot of hope. And so I was supposed to retire at age 65. Then one day I was sitting there behaving myself. Do you believe that? I get this phone call. Miss Buffalo, we've been trying to reach you a long time. How come you're not answering your emails? I'm volunteering at the Stollery Hospital. Can I help you? Well, we've been sending you emails for 2 weeks now. We'd like you to come back to work at the University of Alberta. So I'm back there 6 months ago now as the Indigenous Cultural Advisor to the Provost of the University. Again, we're going to move to the next chapter of what we need to do as fellow Canadians and as Indigenous leaders, and how do we want our children, my grandchildren, I have 7 great-grandchildren, how do I wish to have them educated? We need to say that for the record. I also want to call upon, in page 6 to 9, towards reconciliation, and the calls to action in one little booklet. You have to get a copy of this. And also in here, there's the principles of reconciliation. And the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples is also in here. But it's mandatory to make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples' historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, a mandatory educational requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students, to provide the necessary funding to post-secondary institutions to educate teachers on how to integrate Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods into the classrooms. Provide the necessary funding for Aboriginal schools to utilize Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods in the classroom. To establish senior level positions in government and at the ADM level or higher dedicated to Aboriginal content in education. And I've been to this already. We call upon the Council of Ministers of Education of Canada to maintain an annual commitment to Aboriginal education, including developing and implementing K-12 curriculum, learning resources, sharing information and best practices, building student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual support, and identifying the teacher training needs required. So we call upon all the governments, municipal, First Nations, provincial, and the federal governments to implement the calls to action. It is long overdue. And please, anybody, if you think you have nothing to contribute, give us a call. Let me know what your passions are. If it's the arts, if it's music, if it's policy, if it's theater, if it's dance, is it bricklaying? Maybe geological research and scientific research, eco-knowledge, land-based cultural learning, curriculum development. We will connect you to the right elders. We will connect you to the right builders and those visionaries in our nations. And it looks maybe that we are too passive, but we are not. We've become very, very conniving in our midst. And again, that's a survival tool that we learn. So I'm hoping that you will have a lot of questions. We have now 50 minutes. I'm ready to take a question if you wish. Go ahead.
I was wondering, do you write articles in national magazines like Alberta View, you know, that more people know about this? I mean, we are, what, 30 people here? And I'm sure the rest of the population would like to know what you presented today, which was very informative and educational, and I really appreciate it. So is there any possibility that the rest of the world will learn about this too?
I've written magazines and made contributions, you know, Alberta Teachers Association. And I know we've just had a recent publication on campus talking about the, you know, truth and reconciliation and some of the calls to actions. So if you have a journalist or someone that you know personally, or if you wish to collaborate with someone on a journal, I'd be happy to help you in that way as well. Sure.
I might talk to you later then.
Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. No, I just really want to applaud you on all your work. But one of the questions that I have, because after sort of being very active in your community for so many years, I've sort of pulled back. Is there any real progress, and I'm talking real progress, in the school system and getting the proper education into the school system? Because I've worked, you know, done some presentations, and I mean, it's pathetic. It is. I hate to say it, but that's the way it is. But is there any real progress, or is it still just talk?
Honestly, It's a lot of fluff. Very little substantive change. And it, well, I was a negotiator in education, and it's really easy to give up, and when you get tired. But one of the things that you must do is make sure that you take care of yourself, and so you become more resilient in spirit as well as physical. That they don't take you down. And after I left many tables, I've always said to them, I'm going to be back. I will see how much progress you make in 5 years or in 10 years. And I go back and it's not that great. It's not. There's very little progress. And one of the, if you look at the Memorandum of Understanding in Alberta, it's very comprehensive. There's a clause there about an Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center, the IKWC, it's referred to as. And the reason why that's there is that because as peoples and as nations, Indigenous nations in this country, we've never been allowed to develop our own education. It's always been to the liking of the white man, and very, very low standards. And it's no longer acceptable. And as elders, we want to remind people that that is not the way it should be. Because it's okay with them, it's not okay with us. And by now, we should have all students, for starters, in Alberta, learning about treaty. Mandatory, across the board, K to 12. It's not done. And that's just a bare minimum, right? And that's just a start. And by the time kids are in grade 12, they should be fluent in Cree, their own mother tongue, but they're not. And instead, they just have little short, little modules here, 1 hour, 2 hours a week. That's not acceptable. You can't learn a language learning it maybe a couple hours a week or a day. Even a day would be better. But no, I have to agree with you. But that doesn't mean you must quit. You can rest, but you have to come back. And that's an order. Anybody else?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, was there a difference? Did you meet Jean Chrétien in '69 when he was
Yes.
working on the white paper and when you worked for him? Like,
yes.
Did he come along, or how was it like working with him?
Well, let's just say I wasn't his favorite, even when I was a kid. I remember sitting in the front row. Can I get some water, please? I remember sitting in the front row in 1969 when our ancestors, our elders said no to the white paper. Thank you. 69 white paper. But what we didn't say, we came with our own paper that we developed. It was called a white paper. And our chiefs went to Ottawa. And they shook the establishment. Our chiefs of Alberta, they took plane rides and everything and then sent the bill to Canada. And they led the country. And I'm very proud to have been involved in that as a radical youth. In 1969. In fact, I got an award for that. And, Jean Chrétien, God love him, would have made a fine priest. Very priest-like. even as the way he spoke, like the oblates in our community, that's the accent, that's the, you know, the French dialect and that they had. So when I, as a child, would listen to somebody like Jean Chrétien, and I'd say, yeah, you're a priest, right? Thinking of it as a Cree little girl. Well, when I went to work in Ottawa, 92, I got into trouble because our elders here in Alberta, Treaty 6, and Treaty 8, told us to draft a resolution. Again, going back to, right, the teachings of my ancestors. And they told me in Cree. So I drafted the resolution. It went to a National Assembly of the Liberal Party of Canada, and he was embarrassed by it. He didn't like it. And I remember being called on the carpet by the big guy. I think it was May 9th, 2000. Yeah, I'd have to think, probably 94. I'll have to check my archives. But he was frothing at the mouth. He was this color. And he wasn't very happy with me. But I brought my my two colleagues who are lawyers, and I brought my elder, the gentleman that actually was speaker on the resolution. And so we went and we met in the Prime Minister's office. And so prior to that, I argued, you know, when you guys, you white guys, you bring in your expertise, you pay them. I said, I want my elder paid. Well, what are you talking about? I said, I want him paid. How much do you pay for your lawyer? Oh, wow. No, tell me, how much do you pay for your lawyer? I'm national director. I'm privy to that information. I want my elder paid the same, plus his expenses and his hotel and meals, however long it takes for me to prepare for a meeting with the big guy. If I'm going down, I said, I want to go down with him. I'm not just going to be kicking and screaming. So he did. The arrangements were made. My elder came, Elder Pete Waskahat from Frog Lake. And we met with him. And he said, I gave the directions to our young people, our young technicians, to draft the resolution as it was done. And yes, it did go to the National Assembly, as it was directed by us. And so he wasn't too happy with that. But you know, to add on to that, Jean Chrétien was subpoenaed by my people when we worked on Victor Buffalo versus the Queen. When he was sitting a prime minister, we made history. We subpoenaed him while he was sitting. And he came to testify in a court case in Calgary, the federal court. So when he came there, I had to do all the press and the policy to the legal team. And I said, Sean, I have a copy. Oh, Marilyn, how are you? He was just like, oh, in the boardroom. I said, Sean, look, I got this 8x10. I said, this is a picture when Peace Hills Trust was, when you opened the Peace Hills Trust here. It's a historic document. It's a picture of my uncle who was a chief, Jim Omiuso. Could you sign it for me? And he looked at me, and all my elders were sitting around like this. He said, what do you want me to write? I want, to my political sweetheart, Marilyn Buffalo, Jean Chrétien. Okay, he said, he wrote it to my political sweetheart. So he may not like me, but I'm here. They have to work with us. They have no choice. It's no longer 1969. All right, we have a lot of work to do. Anybody else have a question?
Do you know if the universities are hiring more original peoples to teach the classes? Because I know when I went to the university University of Calgary, one of the biggest problems I noticed was that there wasn't enough teachers that of the different nations of Alberta that, you know, there was people qualified to teach these courses, and students that have graduated with, you know, their honors degrees and that could have been teaching these classes, but they still weren't being filled by Aboriginal peoples. They were being...
They're still not being...
They weren't at that time. That was, I mean, I graduated in 2002 when I was at the University of Calgary, and I noticed that, you know, that I felt then that they didn't have the appropriate people teaching about Native culture at the university level. You know, we'd have somebody that would come in and give all this wrong information, and it was very difficult. So.
Yeah, that's the problem, and I think if you look at the Truth and Reconciliation, the calls to action, also includes very high, you know, expectations of calls to the universities to make sure that they are up to par and hiring the right expertise. And some of the universities have done good work in that area, but not all. And yes, I have to agree with you that, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. Here in Edmonton, we have 3 universities: Concordia, MacEwan, University of Alberta, and of course U of C also does courses here as part of the social work program here as well. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, just in the area of post-secondary. But you know, we also have impact as post-secondary grads have impact as to how that's taught as they go out and teach in the world. And that is really, really, really important. And I always tell people that it doesn't matter, you can have 5, 6 degrees from university. But if you haven't figured out how to implement change or be a change agent, to be able to implement, convey some of that information, and learning from the people, from the community, you haven't learned a thing. And that's the trick, is to be able to amalgamate, you know, to meld the two worlds together. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, you shouldn't become educated from the Munyao, the white man system. I disagree. I totally disagree. You have to be a modern day warrior. You know, and I say, you know, if you can be a doctor, you can be a hockey player, you can be all of the above. Nobody says you have to change. Like, you don't ask the Chinese people or the Japanese Canadians or the African nations to come and give up their culture and their language in order to graduate from our universities. You don't do that. But why are you asking the Indigenous peoples to do that? That's inhumane. It's against the laws of this country. So that mindset has to change. And you know, if non-Indigenous peoples, teachers are coming to our nations, then it's up to them to do the home visits. It's up to them to get to know the community. How else can you instill hope or be able to teach young people if you don't know the community? You can't. You can't do it by remote control. It's the same with me. I've learned to speak your language. I've learned to understand and learn the cunning of the white man. But in that process, in order for me to be effective in the work that I do, I must never forget who I am. I must never forget my values and what I've been taught. I must never forget that those generations that are going to be coming after me, I am nobody. I'm insignificant. It's not about me. And if people are so egotistical maniacs and they think that it's always all about them, and they're the supreme all intelligent because they're white, educated, whatever, and they don't even speak their language, then I got a problem with that. And I'll debate with them in a public forum. I don't care where it is. Because you have to know your people and to be balanced. You cannot be allowing one to dominate the other agenda. And it's very important. You know, an elder made an observation to me the other day, a Métis elder, and I haven't forgotten about it. And he was one of our graduates in the 70s, Elmer Ghostkeeper. And he got his master's degree in political science. He said, I can't believe how passive the young people are now in the university environment. I can't believe that. That's unacceptable. He said, because when we were there, we were, you know, young radical, you know, peoples. And I'm thinking back and I'm going, yeah, you're right. I could relate to what he was saying because I was a young, you know, young mother, member of the Free South Africa Committee in the 70s, and talking to people about Nelson Mandela, and they said, you're crazy. Who the heck is Nelson Mandela? Where's Johannesburg? Nobody even had a clue. And here I'm a Cree person, and I'm talking to them about this, the importance of getting to know what's going on over the world. Come on, you guys. And why did I relate to that? Why was I so passionate about that? It's because my grandfather, my ancestor, Poundmaker, was one of Canada's first imprisoned chiefs. And he was only in his 30s. And he stood up for what he believed and was charged for treason to hang him and Big Bear, our other grandfather. So I could relate to that. And who taught me that? It wasn't the university that taught me that. There were no courses on campus that taught that history. And it really wasn't until Olive Dickinson that came and wrote the book Canada's Indigenous Peoples, that Canada's First Peoples, that became published. And you know, Dr. Olive Dickinson was discouraged from going into university, into graduate work. They didn't accept her theory that Indians had a history. And as a history major, she went and she defied the systems, and eventually someone saw her theory and accepted her, and she got her PhD. And then we reaped the benefit of that, her knowledge and education. In the 70s, she came to work here at the University of Alberta and taught many, many generations of Indigenous peoples, non-Indigenous peoples, about our history here. So I encourage you to read about Dr. Olive Dickinson. And there's many others that have done excellent, excellent work. The problem is that you don't have a nucleus, a center of activity, where it's an Indigenous knowledge and wisdom center, where peoples like yourself and others that do research, that are peoples from other countries, from other lands that want to come and learn about us, can come and learn. In Edmonton, for heaven's sakes, it's 2017, and you don't even have a decent library that houses all of this information. It's scattered all over the place. And you don't even have a friendship center, if you please. That is unacceptable. Alberta is one of the richest states in the whole North American continent, and none of that wealth came to us as Indigenous peoples. I grew up in this city. This is my city. This is Treaty 6. Just because it's a city doesn't mean it's not mine. This is mine. I declare jurisdiction over this city, and it's unacceptable. I grew up here. We had one of the finest friendship centers in this country, downtown, about 112th Street, that old Robertson Wesley Church. And I lived in an apartment across the street, and every Friday and Saturday, as teenagers, we would go there and we would volunteer for our elders. We'd serve them tea. We would have sober dancing, old-time jigs and reels and two-step and then they drove us home. And this is how I grew up here. Going to hockey games and football games and the university and so forth. The YWCA did incredible work in the 60s. But that's not the case anymore. What happened here? It's not good. So anytime I hear Mayor Don Iveson is having another flag raising in the city, I'm like one of those people, oh, not another one. Like, but what are you going to do about the homeless people? What about the unwed mothers? And you know what? In this city, honest to God, there are two things, actually three. One is you need an Indigenous cultural center that should be state of the art, like the best. You need to have a health center that specializes in Indigenous health here. They have one in Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg. How come Edmonton doesn't have this? And they should have in Edmonton a seniors home that is the best. And our people should not be begging on the street and living in the river valley. And one of the very first things I did, the day the Truth and Reconciliation had its opening ceremony here in Edmonton, down at the Shaw Convention Center, I went and I gave my business card to the Mayor, Don Iveson, and I said, I want to meet with you. And he looked at me and he said, I don't meet with individuals. Pardon me? I had never had a white man ever tell me that before in my life. I've had many other encounters that were not as nice, but to tell me that I'm sorry, I said, well, that's a big mistake. Here's my business card. If you wish, I'll bring another delegation with me. If you don't want to meet with me alone, I'll bring a group of grandmothers. Would that be better? Well, too late. Good luck. Good luck in your term, sir. I'm out of here. You know? And I think that's the kind of fellowship we need to do. We need to adopt a bit more of a camaraderie of, you know, we are in this together. It's not ceremonial. Yes, it is. That's very important. You do the public relations. But you have to sit down with the people that are the most passionate, that are willing to commit hours and days of work to drafting policy until you get it right.
My little soapbox thing right now is just to say that a treaty is actually a political entity, and that everyone who's non-Indigenous from this part of the world, we all came to Cree country. This library is built on Cree land, and we all came to Cree country. And I think that's something that we need to start celebrating and acknowledging and working with the original people. Because if we had moved to another country like Germany, Italy, you know, Denmark, Sweden, we would know where we were at, whose country we were in. But that doesn't mean that we would change who we really are, but we would at least acknowledge it. Here, we do not acknowledge the fact that we live in a free country. So it's just what I thought about sometimes.
The treaty is a very sacred covenant, and it's also the third party within that treaty arrangement, and it's with our Creator. The relationship is very sacred, and the covenant that is binding with our Creator and the Creator's laws, your people and my people. There are three parties in that: the Creator, you, and me. Everybody in this room is a treaty. Did you ever think about that? It's not just me that's a treaty. You are too. And we agreed to share this land, the resources. We did not agree to give it up. Very important.
Marilyn, could you relate what that beautiful ceremony that happened last Thursday at the University of Alberta, where the memorandum of understanding was signed between the University of Alberta and the Indigenous people of Alberta. Tell us what that beautiful ceremony was all about, and what is it going to result in, hopefully.
Well, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation exists because of the report, and then that there's archival materials that are very disclosures by our people in this pain and suffering and experience they had in residential school. And that archives collection of stories are kept and will be kept. And the University of Alberta has agreed, as part of the Memorandum of Understanding, to have access to that information. So all Albertans and all Canadians will now be able to use that information for their own knowledge, personal knowledge, their research, and to help to enhance the work that needs to be done on truth and reconciliation. So last week on Thursday, thank you, Ed, for reminding me that we had this very sacred ceremony where we held it in a quad at the University of Alberta, and our teams of workers within the President's office and the Provost's office, and also the Indigenous Initiatives office, led by Kelsey, my colleague, Kelsey Dokus Jensen. We worked together as a team of Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples within the university, and we called on our elders to come and preside and leading us in prayer and ceremony. And our elders say, never again, never, as long as we are, the sun shines and the rivers flow, will our people ever suffer that kind of genocidal policies again in education. You can be free of that era and moving forward, together, moving forward. So it was a very, we're still getting emails and positive vibes and people shaking our hands and saying, that's the best thing I've heard. That's that ceremony, what are we gonna do for an encore? We have to keep that spirit alive and keep it going. So yeah, it was great. Karen?
I just wanted to say, I've been working for many years in the inner city and working on specific issues and stuff like that. But anyways, and one of the things, when I was younger, 12, anyways, when I was younger, I had really admired a lot of the women before me that were going out there and putting themselves out there and saying stuff and representing our people, and and I have to say women, because it was a majority of the ones that I had seen were women, were Indigenous women, and they were so strong and powerful and relating the messages And I thought to myself, as a young person getting into the profession, I thought that's how I want to be, that's how I want to represent myself, and that's how I'll always kind of stay. And so, you know, 20 some years later, I'm still there. And I've seen a lot of the women that I admire, you know, they're getting older, and now I'm seeing, I've been very blessed to be able to come full circle a few times, where I've seen the young women that I had worked with now are getting educated and coming out and they're speaking, kind of thing, where I'm kind of stepping back a bit and they're speaking, kind of thing. And when you say you need to take a break and look after yourself, I totally get that and understand that. I attempted to retire a year and a half ago. It lasted just a year and a half. And then I got called back to help develop some stuff. And so, and really wanting to step that up a notch. Because as I shared with you, I really got nothing to lose. I'm kind of a free spirit that way, where I'm not accountable to finance or a home or a job or anything, kind of thing. And I you know, I don't feel I need to be accountable to anybody but my people, kind of thing. And so, like, moving forward, what would you say I need to do a little bit differently that maybe you would have had a chance to do differently? Or what would you give me advice on moving forward? Because the same message is being said, the exact same things I remember the women that I admire saying, I'm starting to say, kind of thing. And it's just that constant cycle. And I see the young girls that are now speaking up and saying things, they're starting to say, we might use different language because we know more, we keep up with the trends of what, like you said, we become very conniving, we become very resilient and adaptable, and we use the language that they understand, but at the same time, we're sharing old concepts that is very Indigenous to us, but using their language so that they understand. So, like, what is it that you would give me advice on, and what would because I have a lot of young people that come to me and say, like, how did you do this for so long, and what would be your advice? And my advice is always, like, don't make yourself accountable to anything. Like, don't put yourself in a situation where you don't want to say nothing because it might jeopardize your job, or it might jeopardize something. Like, you need to be free to say what you want to say, and if you're truly strong enough or feel brave enough to do that, then yeah, continue doing it. But if you have to, like, worry about feeding this and keeping a home and that kind of thing, it might jeopardize what you have to say. So,
in my work, I've always maintained my independence. I don't really fit in anybody's mold, which allows me that freedom. If I need to walk away, I do. And I don't fit in anybody's clique. And that's okay, because no one controls me. I wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock, not because I have to, but because I need to. And this work I did not choose this work. This chose me. And I think that when you understand that, the cycle of life, and I get it when you're saying about the rhetoric, because it gets to be repetitive. And what is missing in that is the action piece. So when a young person comes to me and I say, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? It's one thing to rant and rave. Hey, but I'm to the point where I don't even listen to the rant and rave. That's how busy we get, right? And even when a person, I go to a chiefs meeting and I know what's going to come out of their mouths even before they've even said it, depending on the issue. Because I've attended so many, and I've cataloged all of these issues and all of these in you know, and the same with the Alberta government. if you've been in policy technician for 47 years, 69, yeah, I mean, I'm getting there. Yeah, you hear a lot of the repeats. But what is the action piece, right? And where I encourage people, young people, it doesn't matter, is to become strategic in their analysis and their approach. Is how best can you make change, right? It's not just one thing to go try and bully your way in there, or to make enemies in the process, or hold 1,000 round dances globally. Well, what is that going to accomplish? Because at the end, you're going to have to come home and face the music, right? And how are you going to change it? Is it to start a scholarship fund? Is it to adopt an elder program? Is it to build a friendship center that's going to, is it going to encouraging the city of Edmonton and having a collective approach to starting up our own women's shelter for Indigenous women? I can't believe the city doesn't even have that. Like our own women that are escaping family violence situations come to Edmonton and they don't have a women's shelter where elders can preside. That's unacceptable. See? And that's the action piece. It's one thing to complain, and I hear the word itching and whining and blah, blah, blah. But, okay, what are you going to do about it? And that's where I come in. That's the kind of work I do, is developing that strategic plan so that everybody has input and buy-in to it. And then you sit and you develop a timeline and how that's going to be carried out. And it's a special skill in itself. And you have to have patience in that. And it doesn't matter if it's music, the arts, or if it's political or cultural, whatever the strategic plan may be or might entail. In the end, you might not even have to spend any money or new money. The money may already be there. It's just a matter of redirecting it. So I've learned how to do that locally, regionally, nationally. And I could tell you, and I could probably teach you how to analyze policy, and you could be able to pretty much tell by the wording and the implementation plan on how that's going to play out or not work. It's not going to work, I can tell you. And I mean, I'm crazy. I start reading 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, reading documents. And they're not fooling anybody, right? Look at the most current situation regarding child welfare, where Dr. Cindy Blackstock has challenged the Canadian government, and the Canadian government has been told 3 times that they are in jeopardy and are not abiding by their own Canadian human rights legislation. They've gone through 3 times and they've been told the same thing. And Canada is not abiding by its own legislation right now as we speak. And that's shameful. But why is anybody not even excited about that? I can't believe that. But people have become so passive and compliant that they don't even think that there's anything wrong with that. Like, why is it acceptable that the Canadian government and the Alberta government spends billions of dollars, billions, building jails for our people, and we can't even get a dime for education for our kids? Like, what kind of a Canada is that? That's unacceptable. And people just think, da-da-da-da-da, take the bus to work, everything's cool. It's acceptable? No, it's not. It is not acceptable. And just when you think that there's going to be change, along comes a young Trudeau with the beautiful hair, and, you know, the selfie heaven, the whole bit. I can't believe it. These 40-year-old Indigenous women who, I mean, well-educated and so on, they just go gaga over this guy, and they have pictures taken with him, and they're like, get out of here. I mean, our kids are dying, for heaven's sakes. Why do you behave like this? It's like Disneyland, you know? They've gone to heaven and they've woke up with Mickey Mouse and celebrate life. There's nothing to celebrate. And have we become cynical? No, we've become very realist about this. It's about people are dying. Not a week goes by. And that's why I'm saying, stay with us, stay with me for a month. You will see what we have to endure in our midst. Like, you will not believe the pain in our community. And Trudeau gave 30 million, last year's budget gave the former Prime Minister Paul Martin, former Minister of Finance for 10 years, that I saw in Ottawa, $30 million over the next 5 years for Indigenous education. And he apparently has this Paul Martin Indian Education Foundation, which is the biggest hoax, ripoff that I've ever seen. And the man should be charged. That's terrible. And yet, our First Nations colleges in this country are having to survive on $500,000 a year. And they're the keepers of our knowledge and our languages in our community and our nations. And they have nothing to work with. And yet Paul Martin walks around in his big $5,000 suit with his rich friends. The guy's a billionaire. What does he need 30 million? He could carve off a small piece of 30 million from his little dynasty and give it to the people. Now that's honorable. That's a tax write-off. But it happens. Like, that's wrong. That's treason. And it doesn't matter which way you cut it. If you understand the laws of this country and human rights legislation, that's defamatory. Like, it's unjust. Thank you.